Welcome to True Echo, where powerful stories uncover hidden truths and inspire the soul. Today's story is one you won't forget. It starts with a cruel joke, and ends with a boy redefining genius, power, and justice, right in the heart of Beverly Hills. Stay with us. The chandelier above the grand drawing room at the Whitmore estate glowed like a suspended constellation, casting polished light over marble floors and glittering champagne flutes. Jonathan Whitmore, one of Los Angeles's most notorious real estate tycoons, lounged in a deep leather armchair as guests in silk gowns and tailored suits murmured around him, waiting for the evening's amusements to begin. Then, he spotted something that gave him a devilish idea. Across the room, 12-year-old Lucas Carter walked carefully, balancing a silver tray lined with foie gras crostinis and cucumber tarts. The son of Emily Carter, the maid who had quietly served the Whitmore estate for over a decade, Lucas was wiry, calm-eyed, and strangely elegant for a child in a threadbare white shirt and second-hand shoes. "Lucas!" Jonathan called with theatrical glee, waving a manicured hand. "I hear you know how to play chess." Lucas paused. He blinked once and turned, bowing slightly in the way his mother had taught him. "Yes, Mr. Whitmore. A little." "A little?" Jonathan laughed, drawing the attention of nearby guests. "Perfect. Come on then. Let's have a little game. Show us how a maid's son handles a king and queen." A soft ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Emily Carter froze at the edge of the room, tray trembling in her grip. She knew exactly what Jonathan was doing, and it was not kindness. Lucas, however, simply nodded. "Yes, sir." He walked to the center of the room, toward the ornate marble chess table flanked by carved dragon chairs. The crowd leaned in with smirks and raised eyebrows. Jonathan leaned closer, lowering his voice with mock concern. "You do know the difference between a pawn and a knight, don't you, boy?" "Yes, sir. I do." "Excellent." Jonathan barked. "Everyone, pay attention. This should be fun." But Lucas didn't flinch. In his eyes, something sharp gleamed. He took his seat with quiet dignity and began arranging the black pieces with precision. Across the board, Jonathan adjusted his own, white, of course. And as he moved his pawn to e4, he turned smugly to his guests and announced, "Let's see how long this servant's son lasts." Lucas made no sound. He studied the board for precisely 3 seconds, then moved his pawn to c5. A murmur passed through the onlookers. "The Sicilian defense," one man whispered. "That's not beginner's play." Jonathan frowned slightly. But he waved it off. Probably saw it in a cartoon. He made his next move with exaggerated flair. Lucas responded instantly, cleanly, without hesitation. Knight to c6. Then bishop. Then castle. The room fell gradually quieter as each of Jonathan's aggressive moves were calmly deflected, countered, and, soon, undone. Emily's heart thundered in her chest. Lucas hadn't been trained. There had been no tutor, no coach, no money for either. Everything he knew, he had taught himself from books found at the local library. By candlelight when the electricity was out. On a paper board he'd drawn by hand. Now, under the glint of chandeliers and the weight of wealthy sneers, her son was playing like a grandmaster. And Jonathan? Jonathan was beginning to sweat. Jonathan Whitmore leaned forward, the smirk on his face slowly melting into a thin line of confusion. He moved his bishop to b5 with deliberate force, slamming the marble piece harder than necessary. His audience, once whispering mockery, now stood frozen in tight, observant silence. Even those who knew little of chess sensed a shift in the room. Lucas responded without hesitation, shifting his knight to d4, placing pressure on Jonathan's exposed center. Jonathan's brow furrowed. This was no longer a game for laughs. The guests no longer smiled. No one noticed when Emily Carter pressed a trembling hand against her chest, her fingers clenching the edge of her apron. Lucas wasn't just holding his own, he was dominating. Each move revealed another layer of control. Of calm calculation. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply played, eyes sharp and unblinking, like a boy who had already seen how this would end. Jonathan reached for his queen and stared at the board, bewildered. Why did every move feel wrong? Every line of attack he saw, Lucas had already sealed shut. He pushed forward anyway, feigning confidence. Let's see how you respond to this, then, he muttered. Lucas lifted his eyes, steady and even. You're exposed on e5, Mr. Whitmore. Gasps spread through the guests. You'll lose your bishop in 2 moves, Lucas added softly. Jonathan paused. His hand hovered over the board. And then, like a curtain lifting, the truth began to unravel across his mind. Lucas wasn't just playing instinctively, he had memorized patterns, mapped out the field several moves ahead. He was reading Jonathan's mind, turning his most aggressive tactics into a slow-motion collapse. Whispers intensified around the room. Did you see that? He warned him. Whitmore's slipping. Jonathan gritted his teeth and forced a weak chuckle. Lucky guess, he said. But inside, a cold panic swirled. For the first time in his life, he was being outmatched in front of his peers, and by a child. Lucas, however, wasn't thinking about pride or revenge. He was thinking about the books he had studied every evening for years. The dog-eared chess guides. The public library's torn copy of my 60 memorable games. The VHS recording of the 1984 Kasparov-Karpov match he'd watched more than 30 times at the community center. That world had been his classroom. The silence his teacher. Jonathan made another move. Lucas answered instantly. The game now moved faster, with the millionaire's face growing redder by the minute. The match was nearing its midpoint, but already the guests could see it. Jonathan had been cornered. His center was crumbling. His knights trapped. His rooks isolated. Even his queen, once menacing, now seemed nervous on her side of the board. Then came a critical moment. Jonathan moved a pawn, desperate to create breathing room. Lucas tilted his head. Then, calmly and with surgical clarity, he advanced his bishop to g5, pinning Jonathan's knight to his queen. The gasp that escaped the audience sounded like wind rushing through a broken window. That's it, someone murmured. Jonathan blinked hard, staring down at the board. He'd walked right into a trap. I didn't see that, he said under his breath. Emily's eyes welled with tears. Her son, her brilliant, soft-spoken, determined boy, was putting every ounce of pain, struggle, and perseverance onto that board. And he was winning. Jonathan finally looked up. Who taught you? He asked hoarsely, trying to keep his voice steady. Lucas raised his eyes and spoke calmly. No one, sir. Just me, and a library card. The room exploded with murmurs. Phones were quietly lifted. Video recording had begun. Senator Claire Wilson, standing near the back with a champagne flute untouched in her hand, lowered her glass and narrowed her eyes. This wasn't just a game anymore. This was history. A suffocating tension hung in the air as if the very walls of the Whitmore mansion were holding their breath. All eyes were now glued to the chessboard, and to the child who had transformed from a servant son into a commanding presence none of them had expected. Jonathan Whitmore, once basking in the glow of superiority, now sat hunched at the board, lips pressed thin, brows locked in a silent battle of pride and disbelief. Across from him, Lucas Carter sat straight-backed and still. His hands were folded neatly in his lap as he waited. Not smug. Not proud. Just ready. Senator Claire Wilson, a former law professor and now a powerful political force in California, leaned toward the guest beside her and whispered, "He's playing 5 moves ahead. Maybe 6. Her companion, a venture capitalist with years of international chess hobby play under his belt, nodded with awe. Whitmore's cooked. That boy's calculating positions most adults can't see. Jonathan's voice broke the silence. So, you're some kind of freak, then? A little savant? He tried to sound amused, but the venom behind the words betrayed him. Lucas didn't flinch. No, sir. Just someone who studies more than he's expected to. The room fell into an uneasy stillness. Some guests looked away, pretending to adjust their jewelry or inspect their champagne glasses. Others stared at Jonathan, their previous admiration beginning to sour. The man who once commanded rooms with a glance was unraveling, and everyone could see it. Jonathan made another hasty move. Lucas's eyes flicked to the board. His hands moved with practiced grace. He repositioned his knight, a quiet but lethal shift. A ripple of recognition passed through a few guests. He's setting up a fork, someone whispered. Jonathan's eyes scanned the board desperately, unaware that he'd just offered Lucas the equivalent of a loaded weapon. And then it happened. Lucas captured Jonathan's bishop with his knight, revealing a discovered attack from his rook, pinning Jonathan's queen behind a pawn wall. The queen, Whitmore's most powerful piece, was now doomed, with no escape. The gasp this time was audible and sharp. Jonathan stared. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His king's guard had completely collapsed. "You're done," a man in a navy suit muttered under his breath. The realization dawned on everyone almost simultaneously. This wasn't just an impressive game. This was a dismantling. Jonathan pushed his chair back suddenly, rising to his feet in frustration. "Enough," he snapped. The guests flinched. Lucas looked up calmly. "We haven't finished the game." Jonathan's face was red now, his jaw twitching. "It's just a game, boy." "No, sir," Lucas said quietly. "It was never just a game to you." Jonathan froze. His fists clenched at his sides as guests slowly backed away from him. The silence had changed. It wasn't just tension now, it was disapproval. Disgust. Senator Wilson stepped forward. "I think we've all seen enough," she said smoothly, her voice carrying command without raising a single decibel. "And I, for one, would like to speak with Lucas's mother." Emily blinked, startled. "Me?" "Yes," the senator said warmly. "You've raised a remarkable son. I'd like to know more." Emily's mouth parted in disbelief. Around her, guests began to gather, not around Jonathan, but around Lucas. The tide had turned entirely. A billionaire had tried to mock a poor boy for sport. And that boy had made him look like a fool. Whitmore's lips curled into a sneer. "You all think this proves something? He beat me in a stupid game. That doesn't change who I am." Lucas stood from his chair and looked Jonathan in the eye, his gaze clear, unwavering. "No, Mr. Whitmore," he said with quiet conviction. "It changes who I am." The room fell into a reverent silence. Lucas reached for his mother's hand. And the boy who had walked in with a silver tray walked out with something far more valuable than money or fame. He walked out with a future. The moment Lucas Carter stepped away from that chessboard, something unspoken yet seismic shifted through the marble halls of the Whitmore estate. The boy who had once been an invisible servant's son was now the most talked about name in the room. Conversations swirled, eyes followed, and phones buzzed as video clips of the match were passed between guests faster than the champagne. Jonathan Whitmore, once the star of his own kingdom, stood at the edge of the gathering, shoulders squared but heart unraveling. He tried to laugh it off, muttering something about beginner's luck to a pair of silent socialites, but even his most loyal inner circle avoided his gaze. The man who had everything, wealth, influence, legacy, had been undone not by scandal or competition, but by a 12-year-old boy with a paper chess set and fire in his mind. Meanwhile, across the room, Senator Claire Wilson stood beside Emily Carter and her son, speaking in low, earnest tones. "Lucas," she said, kneeling slightly to meet his gaze. I've served on university boards. I've interviewed Rhodes Scholars. But I've never seen anyone play the way you did tonight, not just with skill, but with restraint, with character. Lucas said nothing, his hands fidgeting at his sides. Emily, standing beside him, could barely keep the tears from falling. He taught himself. I couldn't afford a board. He drew one with a pencil on cardboard. Senator Wilson's jaw tightened. Her hand went to Lucas's shoulder. You have a gift, Lucas. And it deserves more than this room could ever offer you. Around them, the mood had flipped entirely. Guests who once whispered condescendingly about the help now approached Lucas with admiration, some with business cards, others offering introductions to coaches, schools, even media contacts. Lucas nodded politely, but never with arrogance. He remained the same quiet boy, only now the world was finally starting to see him. Jonathan watched from afar, fists clenched in his pockets. He had created this moment, this spectacle, as a joke. And now it was rewriting the narrative of his entire empire. A young tech mogul whispered loudly enough for others to hear, if that kid was mine, I'd have him training with grandmasters by morning. Another guest laughed and added, we might be looking at the next American world champion. And he's not from some Ivy League prep school either. Jonathan could take no more. He stormed across the room, pushing past guests who barely acknowledged him. He pointed a trembling finger at Lucas. You cheated. The room fell into stunned silence once again. Lucas's expression didn't even shift. Jonathan's voice trembled as he raised it. There's no way a poor kid like you learned that on your own. This was a setup, some publicity stunt. Emily stepped forward now, standing between her son and the man who once controlled her life. My son did not cheat, she said clearly. He beat you because he worked harder than anyone you've ever known. While your children were at tennis camps and boarding schools, mine was reading Soviet chess manuals by flashlight. Jonathan scoffed. He's just a servant's kid. No, Emily said with quiet, proud fury. He's my son. And today, he made history. The crowd erupted, not in laughter this time, but in applause. Even the skeptical, snobbish guests who once looked through her were now clapping, nodding, murmuring words like powerful and incredible. Jonathan was finished. In that moment, no amount of money could buy back the respect he had lost. And Lucas? Lucas had gained something no checkbook could ever purchase. He had become a symbol of defiance. Of hope. Of brilliance rising from the shadows. Senator Wilson turned to a nearby aide and said quietly, we need to get this boy a full ride. And not just for PR. For the country. The aide nodded and slipped out of the room. Meanwhile, Lucas stood with his mother, looking up at the marble ceiling and the glimmering chandelier that had once seemed so far out of reach. Now it simply looked like light. The match was over. But the world was just beginning to see who he truly was. By morning, the world had changed. The video, shot from 3 different angles on 3 different iPhones, had been uploaded to the internet before midnight. It began trending before sunrise. A 12-year-old boy, Lucas Carter, the son of a maid, had humiliated billionaire Jonathan Whitmore in front of a room full of elite power players, using only a chessboard and sheer brilliance. Clips flooded social media. He said, "You're exposed on E5, Mr. Whitmore," and the whole room went silent. This boy's playing like Kasparov in his prime. From cardboard boards to Checkmate in Beverly Hills. Legend. Lucas's name trended across platforms, Twitter, YouTube, Reddit. News outlets picked up the story before noon. The headlines practically wrote themselves. Servant son checkmates billionaire in viral chess upset. From library to legend, Lucas Carter stuns the elite. The boy who beat Beverly Hills. At first, Lucas didn't even know what had happened. He woke up early, as he always did, made his bed, and sat at the table doing chess puzzles with a blunt pencil. Emily received the first call just after 7:15 a.m., from a reporter at the Los Angeles Times. By 9 o'clock, Senator Claire Wilson herself called the house. She wanted Lucas on camera. But Emily was hesitant. She shielded her son fiercely, aware of how quickly the world could turn admiration into exploitation. "I don't want him turned into some kind of mascot," she told the senator. Claire understood. "Emily, I promise, this won't be a spectacle. It'll be an opportunity." Meanwhile, the Whitmore estate was in chaos. Jonathan had become a meme. Dozens of videos had gone viral showing him shouting, "He must have cheated," spliced with chess commentators dissecting Lucas's brilliant gameplay with awe. Sponsors pulled away from Whitmore's upcoming gala. A prestigious club he chaired issued a statement of ethical review. His PR firm advised him to lay low and let the news cycle move on. But it didn't. Because Lucas wasn't just a viral moment. He was a story people wanted to believe in, a genius hiding in plain sight. A child of grit and humility who had challenged the powerful and won, not with noise or rebellion, but with focus and quiet brilliance. 3 days after the match, Lucas appeared for the first time on national television. Dressed in a clean white button-up shirt and navy blue sweater, he sat beside his mother in a modest studio, blinking under the lights. The host leaned in. "Lucas, how did you do it? You've never had a coach, right?" Lucas nodded. "I just studied. I read games by grandmasters and tried to understand how they think." "Where did you get your books?" "The public library," he said simply. "Sometimes they throw out old chess magazines. I kept those, too." Emily watched as the world fell in love with her son, his quiet speech, his unshakable confidence, and his refusal to boast. She remembered all the nights he sat by candlelight, drawing boards on the back of old cereal boxes, whispering moves to himself. She remembered the day he told her, "Mom, one day I want to beat someone important." He already had. But something bigger was unfolding. Later that week, the producers of 60 Minutes reached out. An anonymous donor offered to fly Lucas to New York to visit the Marshall Chess Club. An international chess federation released a statement calling him an extraordinary talent and offered to sponsor his training. And then came the letter, from Stanford University. It wasn't an offer of admission. Lucas was still too young. But it was a full scholarship guarantee. The envelope read, "For Mr. Lucas Carter, future student of excellence." Emily held the letter for a long time, pressing it to her chest. "I never thought this would happen," she whispered. Lucas looked up. "I did." And in that moment, she realized, he hadn't been playing for revenge. He'd been playing for a future. For a seat at the table. And now, the world was building one just for him. The days that followed turned into weeks, and Lucas Carter's life continued to transform in ways even he hadn't dared imagine. He was no longer the Maid's son. He was the boy genius, America's youngest chess phenom, the underdog who humbled the billionaire. But Lucas didn't let the titles change him. Fame touched him, but never consumed him. Instead of posing for fashion covers or making brand deals like some suggested, he asked for one thing, a space where he could teach other kids like him how to play. And with the help of Senator Claire Wilson and a coalition of non-profit sponsors, that's exactly what he got. They called it Moves of Hope, a free online chess academy run by Lucas, with the support of top grandmasters who were now eager to mentor him. The goal wasn't just to train prodigies, it was to help kids from low-income neighborhoods build confidence, critical thinking, and pride in their own intelligence. Lucas filmed the first lesson from his bedroom, sitting at the same scratched desk where he'd practiced with paper pieces. "Lesson 1, he said, looking into the webcam, "don't ever let someone's wealth decide your worth. On this board, every pawn can become a queen." Within 48 hours, the video reached over 3 million views. Comments flooded in. "I showed this to my son. He's already playing again. This boy is a hero to kids who never felt seen." I cried. My daughter said, if Lucas can do it, so can I. Back in Los Angeles, Emily Carter was settling into a new rhythm too. She'd resigned from her housekeeping job at the Whitmore estate, gracefully, without spite. The same nonprofit coalition that backed Lucas's project had offered her a role as a community support program manager, overseeing family outreach efforts across the county. She had spent her life scrubbing marble floors and folding rich people's linens. Now, she was standing behind podiums at conferences, talking about parenting, resilience, and how sometimes, the smallest rooms produced the brightest minds. And Jonathan Whitmore? He had vanished from the public eye. His mansion stood cold and quiet. The marble chess table, once a symbol of his wealth, was now buried under a dust sheet. His phone no longer rang with gala invitations. His PR team had dissolved. And those who once fought for his approval now refused to return his calls. The humiliation hadn't faded. It had metastasized. It wasn't just that he lost. It was how he lost. On camera. Before witnesses. With cruelty, and then cowardice. He had accused a child of cheating, had mocked a maid's son for sport, and then imploded when the world saw him for what he was. But the world hadn't forgotten. Every few months, the videos resurfaced, especially when Lucas hit new milestones, defeating a grandmaster, being invited to the U.S. Junior Championship, receiving awards from educational foundations. Each time, Jonathan saw his own downfall replayed, frame by frame. But what haunted him most wasn't the match. It was the boy's voice. I didn't win today because I had a private coach. I won because I studied harder than anyone expected me to. That voice echoed in the back of his mind every night. Meanwhile, Lucas had no interest in Jonathan's downfall. He barely thought of the man anymore. His focus was forward, always. One afternoon, Lucas was invited to speak at a youth summit hosted by the state governor. As he stood before a crowd of 10,000, the youngest speaker of the event, he clutched his speech in slightly shaking hands. Then, he looked up. He didn't need the paper. I want to tell you what my mother told me, he said, his voice steady and clear. She said, they'll look down on you because they don't know who you are. So show them. That's what I did. And that's what you can do. The crowd erupted in applause. He smiled, not with ego, but with quiet pride. He had made his move. And the board was wide open. A crisp autumn wind rustled through the trees lining the entrance to Stanford University. Lucas Carter stood still for a moment at the gates, his fingers brushing the embroidered patch on his jacket, Stanford Chess Society. He closed his eyes and breathed in the air like it was the final piece of a dream come true. He was 18 now. A full-ride scholar. National chess champion. Founder of a global nonprofit that had reached more than 80,000 students across 5 continents. But more than all that, he was still the boy who had once drawn a chessboard with a pencil on cardboard and lit candles to keep studying when the power went out. He hadn't forgotten. And he never would. Emily walked beside him, her eyes misty as she looked up at the iconic red-tiled campus buildings. You did it, baby, she said softly. No, Lucas replied, a quiet smile curving his lips. We did it. Just then, his phone buzzed. Another notification. Another article trending, from Maid's son to world finalist, Lucas Carter heads to World Chess Championship in Oslo. He glanced at it, then tucked the phone away. The game ahead was already in his mind, every move unfolding like a dance he'd been practicing since age 7. But something else had changed now. This wasn't about just proving himself anymore. It was about legacy. He continued mentoring through Moves of Hope, which had expanded into a full foundation. They now provided scholarships, laptops, chess sets, and training for underfunded schools around the country. Lucas visited community centers each summer, sitting cross-legged on floors with kids who reminded him of himself, wide-eyed, brilliant, and overlooked. In interviews, he always said the same thing. I'm not special. I'm just what happens when someone's finally seen. Meanwhile, Jonathan Whitmore had sold his estate and withdrawn from the public completely. Real estate tycoon no more, he lived quietly on the outskirts of Santa Barbara, a shell of his former self. But every so often, he watched one of Lucas's interviews, and though bitterness curled in his gut, something else flickered there too. Regret. Sometimes he even whispered, I could have helped him. I could have done something different. But he hadn't. And the world had moved on. One evening, Lucas returned home for Thanksgiving. As he stepped through the modest new house Emily now owned, paid for in full by donations and honorariums she never asked for, he passed a framed photo on the wall. It wasn't of him holding a trophy. It was a faded photo of the cardboard chessboard, drawn in pencil, resting beside a candle stub and a worn library book. Next to it, in neat handwriting, was a quote. True genius isn't born from privilege. It's born from persistence. That night, Lucas joined his mother at the kitchen table. No press. No cameras. Just the two of them and a wooden chess set she'd bought him the day after his big match, years ago. They played in silence, each move a memory, each laugh a celebration. When Emily eventually tipped her king in surrender, she smiled and said, one day, they're going to write books about you. Lucas looked up, eyes warm. Maybe, he said. But if they do, I hope they write about you too. Because no genius, no dream, no destiny is ever made alone. Lucas Carter's story reminds us all that brilliance can rise from anywhere, if it's nurtured with love, courage, and belief. In a world that often mistakes privilege for power, Lucas proved that determination and character shine brightest. As Lucas once said, where you start doesn't define you. But how far you're willing to go, that does. If this story moved you, don't just scroll by. Subscribe to True Echo for more powerful stories that inspire change. Share this video, comment with your thoughts, and tell us. Have you ever surprised someone who underestimated you?